The absolute biggest danger of Temu is that you underestimate what they are capable of. That you don't realize what's happening. But this, what happened in China, can also happen here. Good afternoon. I thought I'd start where I left off last year for the people that saw me here last year. In China, there are what they call 4 little dragons that go overseas. And those 4 little dragons, you probably know them. They are the companies Alibaba, Shein, Pinduoduo, and ByteDance. Alibaba has many different platforms where they sell cross-border. Probably the most well-known is AliExpress. Shein has a Shein platform. Pinduoduo is Temu, the company behind Temu, which I discussed extensively last year. And then ByteDance, of course, we've heard a lot about it already now, is TikTok Shop, is behind TikTok Shop. Now, I specifically today want to do 3 things. I'm going to talk about Temu a bit more. I will discuss and give a reality check about TikTok Shop. And I will discuss the most important e-commerce trend in China, which is also my favorite trend. So I won't tell you yet what that is. But let's start with Temu. So last year I ended by saying you can not have the danger of underestimating this company. And what I've seen in the last couple of weeks and months is that it does happen again, especially in relation to the tariffs and what is happening in the United States. There's a sort of a hooray atmosphere, like this is going to kill off Temu. And I want to discuss that it's a bit otherwise. I see it otherwise. But first, let's take one step back to last year, where I explained that Temu basically started with what they call the fully managed model. Fully managed because they do everything basically, and the merchant has to do very little. They only put the materials, the goods, in the warehouse of Temu, and Temu then sends it across the world in airplanes, but they also do the pricing, they do the marketing, etc., etc. And by doing this, they could very quickly have a large assortment of products because the merchants didn't need to have any experience in cross-border e-commerce whatsoever. So this is why they had so many products all of a sudden. But what they started doing last year in March 2024, they implemented the semi-managed model, which I also mentioned, I think, last year. And in the semi-managed model, they say to the merchant, you know what? You ship it by boat, sea freight, to a foreign country, you put it in a warehouse there, and you also take care of the last mile delivery with a local courier. So this is something that they've been pushing since March last year. Why? Why are they pushing this? Well, for instance, because it lowers their own logistical costs. The logistical costs are now with the merchant. The merchant does get a higher margin, but this helps them to make their business model more profitable more quickly. The second thing is, instead of delivering in 10 to 14 days from a warehouse in the south of China, what they can now do is they can have delivery times of 2 to 3 days from those local warehouses. They also implemented this semi-managed model because they were anticipating regulatory risks. They knew that the regulations in the US, in the EU, would be changing because we consider, of course, that fully managed model with all of those goods a bit damaging to our own economies. So they were anticipating that the rules would change. And last but not least, there's not so much that you can put in a small package in an airplane, but if you put goods inside foreign warehouses, they can be very different goods, very much larger. So what you see here are products that last year were already sold on Temu through the semi-managed model in the United States. Now, if you think that these are relatively big products, you haven't seen anything yet, so do you want it bigger? How about an excavator? You can buy an excavator on Temu in the United States. Or do you want it even bigger? How about a complete house? You can buy a foldable house on Temu in the United States, also on AliExpress, by the way. So this is something that they've been doing in the past year, in the past 12 to 15 months. But they found out after a while that there's quite a lot of merchants that don't want to take the risk of putting those goods in a foreign warehouse. You lock up a lot of capital, and what happens if you cannot sell it? So are you going to scrap it? Are you going to sell it below cost price? So a lot of merchants didn't want to do that. So what they said is, okay, what we'll do is we'll make a variation on the fully managed model, and we will ourselves send it by sea freight to those foreign warehouses, and we will still take care of the whole logistical chain. So they've made sort of a mix of the two options. What they want to do is by the end of the year, for all of the fully managed goods that they sell, they want to have about 60% through those forward warehouses, as they call them. So what we've seen with Temu is that after September 2022, when they launched in the United States, they already have like 6 different business models. So I discussed fully managed and forward warehouses, semi-managed. They also now allow some merchants in China to send an order directly to the consumer without it even going through a Temu warehouse, a bit like drop shipping. They have local to local, and they have also in some markets launched third-party marketplaces where basically Temu is becoming more and more and more like Amazon. So that's where it's headed. Their own goals at the moment is that in this year they want to do about half of their business through fully managed, which started out as 100%, and then 20% semi-managed and already 30% third-party sales, where the third-party brands decide their own pricing instead of Temu deciding that for them. That's what their plan is. Now, of course, as you might have noticed, there's a new president in the White House. In the US, they were already discussing last year canceling the de minimis. Now, the de minimis is the tax exemption level of $80 or $800 in the United States. So anything that comes in as a Temu or a Shein package in an airplane does not, bless you, does not have to pay any import taxes if it's under $800. Now, they want to get rid of that. I think there's a good reason to get rid of that. I don't know if it's the fentanyl problem, because they say we want to get rid of this because it's being used to smuggle ingredients for drugs into the United States. But it did happen. So on the 2nd of May, the United States canceled the de minimis and Temu had to start paying import taxes. And the effect was disastrous. As you can see here, their sales in the United States decreased by about 50%, and also before the cancellation of the de minimis, most of the goods were sold through that fully managed model, and that's almost completely disappeared, and most of the sales are now through that semi-managed model. As a matter of fact, at the end of April, Temu decided to completely stop the fully managed sales to the United States. So, and then people say, see, this is what we wanted. The de minimis is cancelled, and this is killing Temu, and we get rid of Temu, largely. This was an interview or an article that I was interviewed for CNBC. Unfortunately, I completely disagree with the headline that they put on top of it. Because this makes it seem that Shein and Temu see their demand plunge because of the cancellation of the de minimis. But that's not the right cause and effect. And it's very important for us to know what really happened, because the same thing might happen here in Europe when we change our regulation. So this is an example of a calculation before, maybe at the start of this year, the situation at the start of this year. The tariffs were relatively low, and that meant that a product that would be sold for $50 on Temu and the same product for $80 on Amazon, when they would have to start paying duties, that's only over the free on-board pricing. You also need to pay some custom processing fees, but you'll see that the final price at Temu is still much lower than that at Amazon. The difference has become smaller, but if you want that product, you would probably still choose for Temu with this kind of price difference. So why did all of a sudden their sales collapse? And it was not the cancellation of the de minimis, it was this. Because Donald Trump, for several times, raised all of the import taxes in a game of chicken with China until they were 145 by April 9, 145%. And for small packages like Shein and Temu, it was 120% or a $100 flat fee. This, of course, makes that model, that fully managed model, completely unsustainable. In our research for TechBus China, we found out that Temu could handle tariffs up to about 50%. They could handle that, and they would sort of divide the cost between the consumer, their own margin, and the merchant, but they could handle up to 50%. This was unsustainable, and that's why they canceled their fully managed model. So it's not because of the cancellation of the de minimis, it's because of these import taxes. Now, what you also see, this is a graph by Statista from a few days ago, and you can see that without any additional tariffs, there would not be any real impact on the Chinese production output. With 10% tariffs, it would be a bit, but with 145%, that would be disastrous for the Chinese economy. So, and this is what happened. Now, when it happened, and when Temu stopped their fully managed sales to the US, another thing that they did is they completely shifted their advertising budget to Europe. And you might have noticed that you got a lot more Temu commercials all of a sudden. So this is basically what is happening, is that the sales that they are now missing in the US, and I think we've seen these figures before earlier this morning, is now shifting to the EU. It is like a big balloon where if you push one side of the balloon, the air will simply go to the other side and the pressure on the other side will increase. That's what's been happening with all of a sudden the growth of Temu in Europe. Now, like I said, this whole thing is a game of chicken between China and the United States, where in this game of chicken, of course, Donald Trump, as he always thinks, he had the best cards. Oh. He had the best cards. And he thought he had a good poker face, but he lost this game of chicken with Xi Jinping, which eventually resulted in the tariffs now coming down to 30%. 30% is for all bulk imports that go into China. So that's also the semi-managed model, and the fully managed through those forward warehouses because they come in bulk by sea freight. For the small packages, it went down to 54%. Now, if you remember, I said that if it's around 50%, Temu would probably be able to handle that. And what we see is they come roaring back because they have already restarted their fully managed model. Not for all products, but for certain products. Now, why is this important for us? Because we are thinking about doing the same thing. We have the 150 tax exemption in Europe. Under 150 euro, no taxes paid. So if that happens, the actual tax that needs to be paid is most of the time between 3 and 5%. That is not going to stop a Shein or a Temu. Even the French law that the French want to implement the environmental surcharge to put €5 extra on a package from Shein because it's fast fashion. Strange enough, there's no surcharge for Zara, H&M, and maybe other parties that make the same types of products. Questionable. But this is also not going to make an enormous difference, because the average order value in Europe is actually 32 on Temu and 55 on Shein. It's much higher than a lot of people think. A lot of people still think that it's all orders under €10 that are shipped for free. That's already no longer the case for a long time. So what we are seeing also is that we try to change our legislations, our regulations, but we are a very slow old car in Europe, and we are being overtaken by something that has already been mentioned a few times, China's speed. They are simply going much faster, and like I showed you, Temu has already adopted their business model several times. But it does have an impact on their own forecasts. So you can see here that the forecast they made in 2024 and the current forecast, they think that they will do 10 billion less in the United States, and they especially also expect some things to happen in Europe and other countries that want to change their legislation. So they will definitely have much lower sales coming year, but they still keep on growing. So these things do not kill Temu or Shein. They were expecting to be profitable next year. That will take longer, but it will not stop them. It will just simply slow them down. Now, if you want to go deeper into this topic, you can read the Temu Watch number 8 report that I wrote for TechBoss China that has much more details, also what happened before and after the 12th of May. And there's one more thing that I want to say about Temu, because with TechBoss we also did some bespoke research for an e-commerce company that wanted to know more about the HR policies of Temu. So we did some expert interviews with some of their staff members. We also did some desk research in the Chinese media, and we found out that Temu is actually run like a military operation. Basically, if you work at Pinduoduo, the parent company in Shanghai, it's very well possible that your boss will come to your desk and say, okay, you pack your stuff tonight because tomorrow you're flying to the other end of the country, to Xinjiang, because we're starting grocery delivery there, and we need a warehouse manager, and that's your new job. Good luck. And then when you work there for half a year, they might actually come to your desk and say, we are starting up Temu in a couple of extra Eastern European countries, so you're needed most there, so you're gonna move there for a couple of months. And then normally they centralize people back to China again. So this is what we're up against. It's really a military operation of a company that is extremely lean and mean. So this is what I want to say about Temu. And again, it's a bit of a warning. Now, today we're here in Estrel, in Berlin, and I want to take you to the other side of the world. So let's fly all the way to Beijing. If you want to do this for real, you can do this with Sven, me, and Jochen in October. And we go to the northwest of Beijing, to a company called ByteDance. Now, ByteDance, you already heard a lot about the product today, TikTok and TikTok Shop and live commerce. And I want to give you a bit of a reality check from a different perspective of what you've heard this morning already after the break. But just like I did with Temu last year, to really understand this, we need to go back in time a bit to the year 2016. Because that was the year that ByteDance launched both Douyin in China and TikTok in the West. It's quite remarkable because normally they just follow later with a Western version, but this is what they did. It launched it at exactly the same time, and it started taking off when it was merged with Musical.ly, which ByteDance also bought, and that happened in August 2018. Now, one thing that happened relatively quickly in Douyin in China is that they started in-app e-commerce. Before 2021, most of the e-commerce generated in Douyin was actually by leading traffic to third-party websites like JD, like Taobao of Alibaba. But in 2021, they said, you know, we want to have that sales for ourselves. So it was no longer allowed to have links to third-party live commerce streams, especially. And they've been doing really well, as you can see, and now they have about almost $500 billion in sales in China. But the thing is, it's not just e-commerce anymore on the other side of the world. Because very quickly, Douyin also started group buying. Douyin turned into Groupon, where you could buy from a video or from a live stream a coupon which you could take to an offline store to get a special deal. You could also go into the same city menu at the top, and you could look for a hotel, and you could book your hotel on Douyin. Douyin became Booking.com. And a bit more recent, it became possible to also order your groceries online in Douyin. And you could have them delivered the next day with Douyin Supermarket, Douyin Xiaoshi, or even within an hour with instant retail. So this is the evolution of Douyin in China. Now that, just like with TikTok or with Pinduoduo, what I told you last year, had an enormous impact on the Chinese market, where Alibaba lost a lot of market share to both Pinduoduo and to Douyin. By the way, I'll have a QR code at the end where you can fill in your email address, and then tonight or tomorrow I will send you the handouts also, if you want them. So you might say, okay, so what this is something that happens in China, has not a lot of influence on us, but of course what happened is TikTok also arrived here in Europe, which was supposed to make a big bang. Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about why I think that certain things work in China while they don't work here in Europe. That's something that we also do during the tour. I listened to the podcast of Stefan. I listened to the podcast of Christina and Jochen. It was about 1.5 hours. I made a summary of what they said, and I put it on a T-shirt. So that's basically their conclusion. But what I do want to discuss is that there are a lot of especially social media companies that are hyping this. They are saying, because live commerce is so enormous in China, you must also do it, because otherwise you will miss the boat. And I think that there is a place and a time for live commerce. But let's look at the facts. So these are all of the e-commerce sales in Douyin that we saw before. Now, TikTok Shop started in Southeast Asia in 2021. These are the sales, the annual sales on e-commerce in Southeast Asia, in the US and in the UK. So it's a bit on a different scale. And then people say, yeah, but hold on, Ed. There's 1.4 billion people living in China. Of course it's much more. Okay, so then let's divide this by the number of online people. Doesn't really change much, right? So people in China are just much more used to buying in these apps. And it's also the way they buy, because of all of the sales in Douyin, about 2/3 comes from live commerce. And the rest is mostly Douyin Mall and Douyin short videos. It's the other way around almost in Southeast Asia. Even though live commerce is much more popular there, only 25% of all sales is done through live streams. And then in the US, it's only 10%. So you might be a bit disappointed by the performance of TikTok Shop so far, but I think there's some people that are much more disappointed in Beijing, in that office that I just showed you, because they've been constantly missing their own targets. They have, I think, overestimated, and they have been thinking that what works in China works elsewhere as well. And that's why you see that they, both globally and also in the US, they have not met their targets, which, like I said, doesn't make them very happy. So they are taking action now. They've laid off a bunch of people that are working in the US team for TikTok Shop. And they are sending in the Chinese managers to clean things up. Well, I would think that probably one of the reasons that it's not super successful yet is lack of localization. So I'm not sure if sending in more Chinese managers is going to do the trick, but this is one of the things that they are doing. Another thing that they are doing is they are trying to build the same ecosystem they have in China for live commerce. Now, this is the ecosystem in China, where you have the brand, you have the host, the creator, the KOL, the influencer, whatever you want to call it, the platform and the MCN. Platform is easy. That's where the broadcast takes place on Taobao, on Douyin, or on Kuaishou in China. An MCN is something very typical for China. It's a multi-channel network, and these are basically agencies that recruit, train, incubate the hosts, the influencers. They train them how to be good salespeople on Douyin. And they also have a lot of production facilities. So during the tours that we do, we go, for instance, to Wuyou and Youwant to actually see the studios of these MCNs. Now, what ByteDance thinks is one of the problems that we don't have very good professional MCNs here in Europe and in the US, and therefore the hosts are not up to on par with what they see in China. So they are now planning to either send the hosts to be trained in China. So if you want a vacation to China, become an influencer with TikTok Shop, or they want to bring some of the bigger MCNs to Europe and America. So you will see some Chinese MCMs probably appearing in this field here in China, or in Germany. Now, of course, what's also very important not to forget is that the brand pays for the content creation, they pay the MCN, and they also pay the platform for advertising because you need to create traffic to your content. Now, that's something that is often forgotten that I want to mention, because this is the roadmap for TikTok Shop. The first 2 months, they are recruiting merchants by saying, we can make your product go viral for free. So you get a lot of traffic without paying for it. Sometimes they even subsidize the prices. I personally really dislike that Lidl example, because if you saw what they were charging for that product, so if you give a product away almost for free and you give a lot of free traffic to that live stream, it's not so difficult to sell out within 18 minutes or whatever it was. So this is the first phase. The second phase is that they weed out those merchants that are not performing. They have certain targets for sales per 1,000 views or 10,000 views or whatever it is. And if you don't meet that, you don't get any free traffic anymore. So they will also lower the commissions, the discounts that they give for the consumer. So as a merchant, you will need to have a very good discount or deal yourself if you want to continue selling on TikTok. The next phase is they start subsidizing the creator. They can give them all kinds of incentives, and they also start pushing the merchants to not do their own productions anymore, but work with those professional hosts and MCNs. And then finally, and this is already happening now in the US, it's pay-to-play time. And that's when you have to pay for actually getting traffic to the content that you also had to pay for with an MCN. So this is managing expectations. If you have a problem in those first 2 phases already, it's very unlikely that you will do better in the 4th phase, where you still have to pay for everything yourself. So when you start with TikTok Shop, and again, there is a place and a time on TikTok Shop for certain products, but keep this in mind. Don't let yourself be overwhelmed by that first stage in their playbook. The second thing that I want to do is show you this. I showed you that there's already first e-commerce, local services, and then instant retail in China. That roadmap is already being copied in Southeast Asia, where local services has been started in Thailand and in Indonesia. In the US, they are now recruiting people for local services. So you can imagine what could happen here in Europe as well down the road for TikTok Shop. So keep this in mind. Something that might not be relevant for your business now might become relevant later on. So, if you want to know more about the reasons why I think that it's not working so well, you can read my TikTok Shop Update Part 3 report on TechBus China. Or you can listen to the Let's Talk Marketplace podcast with Valerie and Ingrid, which was called When FOMO Meets Meh. So, Temu, Douyin. Now let's take you to the other side of Beijing, to the southeast of Beijing, to a beautiful company called Jingdong. Last year at Jingdong, we had a couple of visitors from Germany. It was really cool. They were very impressed by our complex and by our buildings. You might recognize some faces here that you've already seen on stage today. But the thing that is really cool about Douyin, or about JD now at the moment, is that we have started food delivery. We used to be a traditional e-commerce company, but now we're doing food delivery. And the cool thing is that our boss, Richard Liu, he actually went out as a courier for 1 day, together with me and my colleagues, to deliver food. So, and better even, after a long day of very, very hard work, he came back to us to drink beer and have hot pot. What a guy. Last week, he was in a Four Seasons hotel. He also ordered something on JD Takeaway. And he gave my colleague 1,000 renminbi in tip. That's a €140 tip. What a guy. What a great boss to have, huh?
That is such a typical and cheap JD publicity stunt. Your boss does that all the time, right? Getting cozy with the common people. What are you doing in the food delivery market anyway? The war for this market was fought a long time ago between our Meituan yellow team, the red team of Baidu Waimai, Baidu you might know as a search engine in China, and the guys in blue of Erleme. Yeah, those were the days. And we ended up buying Baidu Waimai when they couldn't win this war. Well, that might be true, but even though you bought Baidu Waimai, we kept on increasing our market share. And even when Alibaba bought you guys, then, you still didn't stop losing market share, huh? You guys didn't do all that well. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But at the end of the day, I mean, things became peaceful. Like, we had 30% of the market, you guys had 70% of the market, and there were a few very small players, but things kept really quiet for a very long time. Things were peaceful. What are these JD guys doing in this market all of a sudden?
Well, don't tell these two, but we're actually not really all that interested in food retail. But we've figured out that with food retail, you have a high frequency, so people open your app a lot of times. So we get more traffic in our app. And also, one of the main reasons why we're doing this is because of instant retail, which you here in Europe seemingly call quick commerce, but we call it instant retail. Now, instant retail works as follows. You have many different, you have different business models, but this is the marketplace business model, where a consumer goes into an app, either Meituan Shangou, it's our Jingdong Miaosong, or Erleme, and they order something and that gets delivered from a local shop, an offline retailer. So our couriers, me and my colleagues, we go there to pick up these goods. And it can be for groceries, but it can also be for electronics. Nowadays in China, most of the new smartphones are launched by instant retail, because people want to have that phone within half an hour or an hour. They don't want to wait for that to be delivered 2 or 3 days later. And you even have people in China that go on vacation, take very little with them, but have all of the stuff they need when they arrive delivered by instant retail from Miniso. So this is something that is a market that's been exploding in China. It was already there before COVID. It got a boost during COVID, but it's now tripled in 3 years' time. So this is how big it's become. And there are certain people in this market, in the Chinese e-commerce market, that say that this will largely replace traditional e-commerce. Because if you can get it within an hour, why would you wait for 2 or 3 days? The thing is, when this trend started in 2019, we at JD, we were market leaders with JD Waimai at the time. So we had the biggest market share. But that has sort of changed because something happened with Meituan, with those yellow guys, that made them grow very fast at the expense of Erleme and ourselves.
Now, at Meituan, our instant retail business really started taking off at the expense of those blue guys of Erleme when we started introducing Lightning Warehouse together with retailers. We had found out that convenience store owners had problems getting instant retail profitable because of the limited number of SKUs they had. But when they would open a Lightning Warehouse, which is basically a dark store in a residential area, then they could raise the number of SKUs to 5,000 or even 8,000 and become profitable relatively quickly because they also pay lower rent. Now, last year in October, one of our Lightning Warehouse partners, Xiongben, was visited by a group of Germans from some organization called K5. No idea. And they went deep into the bowels of Beijing to visit the Xiongben Lightning Warehouse, one of the Xiongben Lightning Warehouses. And they quickly realized that this business model is very different from what you see with the flash delivery companies like Gorillas, Getir, Zap, Flink in Europe, because instead of trying to compete with the retailer, actually what we do is we work together with the retailer. The retailer has the warehouse, we have the platform, we have the marketplace, and we have the couriers, me and my colleagues. And this is a business model that seemingly works much better than what you guys are doing in Europe. Thank you.
It's not easy to do a keynote with this kind of competition, sorry. But what I want to share with you is these guys at Meituan, they have done really well with those Lightning warehouses. They have more than 30,000 already, and they want to grow to 100,000, and by that time they will have a GMV of 200 billion renminbi. Now, the problem that we had at JD, why we couldn't keep up, is because we were not doing any food delivery, and because Meituan and Ele.me were doing food delivery, they had a very high density of drivers, of couriers around the city. So they could simply add instant retail to that. Whereas we were doing the other thing, we were doing instant retail, and we didn't have a very high density. That's why we have started food delivery. And we're doing really, really well, because we started this in February, and in March we had 1 million daily orders, and by now we have 25 million daily orders. So we're doing great.
Yeah, but we at Ele.me, we're also doing great because we teamed up with Alibaba's biggest marketplace, Taobao. And now people can order something on Taobao and then have it home delivered within an hour by instant retail. Instant gratification. And that way we've been able to increase our orders to 40 million a day. Now hold it right there, you sneaky bastards. You guys are juggling numbers, because those 25 million daily orders of JD and those 40 million daily orders by Ele.me contain a large number of coffee and milk tea deliveries. Now, JD has teamed up with Coty Coffee and is delivering coffee to consumers for as little as 25 euro cents. And about half of their daily orders are those types of coffee and milk tea deliveries. The same goes for Ele.me, although it's only about 25% of their orders. Now we at Meituan, we never had so many coffee and tea deliveries. So this rise in daily orders doesn't really hurt us at all. It does, however, hurt a lot of independent coffee stores, because when Coty lowered their prices, Luckin Coffee also had to lower their prices, and a new coffee sector price war began. And a lot of independent coffee stores cannot survive this business. So you are sort of juggling numbers, and you are making it seem like you're growing your business, but at the same time, you're killing off a whole sector. And you know what? Now you've announced that you're also going into the travel business with hotel bookings and stuff like that. Was killing off one sector not enough?
You know, I've got the remote control. You know that? So this is, of course, a bit of fun to play with this subject, and you might again say, so what, Ed? This is happening in China. But like I said, like I started, we have seen the 4 little dragons that go overseas in e-commerce, and you have these in other sectors as well. So you will see them in EVs. You will see them in meal delivery, in instant retail. Because Meituan, which you just, the yellow guys, they have already started food delivery with Kita in the Middle East and in Brazil. And they've even started grocery delivery with Kmart in some of those same markets. Didi, the Chinese Uber, is already also active in Brazil with food delivery. So these companies are leaving China. Now, I was talking about some of those milk tea and coffee companies. They are also leaving China and going abroad. Luckin has just opened 2 stores in New York. So it's a matter of time since more and more Chinese companies, whatever business they are in, are coming to our markets. And that is the last thing that I basically want to share with you, that if you get your food delivered, it might not just be a Chinese company that it brings you your lunch, but is also coming for your lunch. Because the pattern is the same every time. We've seen it with Temu, we've seen it with other companies. They become a domestic market leader, and they have such enormous reserves that they very quickly, because they have billions of customers, sometimes a billion of customers, if they are a very popular app like Meituan or Taobao or Pinduoduo, then when they internationalize, they use their reserves to buy market share, just like we've seen happening with Temu. And then after that, they will push out the local competition. This already happened in Hong Kong when Meituan launched Kita there. They have already become, in 1 year, market leader in Hong Kong. And it's a small market, but they know how to do this. So my final message for you is, are you ready for this type of competition? Are our legislators ready for these types of strategies, these types of approaches that will come to our market? So it's good that you all are here and are listening to my keynote, but you need to do more. You need to do much more. So in China, there is a man that they call in China Su Wen. Su Wen once said,
行走的人看起来就像尤塞恩·博尔特。
very wise words. I've translated it for you. Don't laugh. Wenn alles stilsteht, sieht der geht aus wie Usain Bolt. That last two bits were the easy. So he basically says, don't stand still and keep on learning about this. And another thing that he said, there was another thing that he said, but first, this Su Wen, this very wise man that they call Su Wen in China, you might actually know him. He might be slightly familiar. And he had one other famous quote that he said, my number one takeaway from the K5 expedition to China was, we are fucked. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the stage, Mr. Su Wen.
Ed. Okay, I didn't know what was coming. Thank you so much. Maybe I should work on my language. Basically, I think, you've covered so much, and I knew we had our prep talk, and I mean, everybody now, I think, feels informed. I mean, when you look at, all the research you're doing and the people you talk to, it's like, and you covered so many issues and topics and strategies and numbers, but why, if you can read it, why would you actually recommend to go to China? What's the number one thing?
Well, I think that what you also saw with the group last year, it's one thing is that they changed the way they view China. We normally, at the end of the tour, we have a tea session, and a lot of people had a very different perception by the end of the week than by the beginning of the week. On the one hand, about life in China, but also about how fast things go, but at the same time also how inefficient certain things are at the same time, because you're in a high-speed train, but there's also things that go wrong during the day. So I think that you need to better understand the country, and then, because of all of the information that we of course share during the program, you also get to better understand what we are up against, these players that come to our market.
Yeah, so I totally relate to that, and maybe like the regie can pull up the slide we have for the next tour. And you are here today and tomorrow, and we have a little, like, if anybody is interested to dive into this, we're gonna meet up in like a couple of minutes at the K5 sales point right outside the stage here. Actually, and we have group members from last year, they are joining us. So actually, for my personal recommendation is like, give it a try, because I feel like, because my biggest key takeaway is not we are fucked, but my biggest key takeaway is like, if you have the feet on the ground, you really understand where it's coming from and what it's coming at us. And also you can start developing countermeasures and counter strategies, or maybe incorporate certain of these learnings into your own business or lifestyle.